everything.
So we're so grateful for you being here. And if you want to contact Dr. Heather Bennett, you can reach out to the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. So you'll find her contact information and all those details on the website. And so we don't have any time for questions. I know that if you do have questions, they'll put them in the chat and then Heather could always respond or we could share them out with her. So I want to turn it over to Laura and Sharif, Laura Boyce, Sharif El-Mekki, so that they could take it from here to our next panel.
All right, thank you, Donna Marie. I think Sharif is going to start us off, so go ahead, Sharif.
All right. Thanks again, Dr. Bennett. That was fantastic. Thanks for helping us frame this conversation. So on behalf of the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium, Policy and Advocacy Committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session where we officially unveil the consortium's policy agenda for this upcoming year. My name is Sharif El-Mekki, and I serve as the CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. And we've been an active participant in this consortium since its inception, and really pleased to be here.
And my name is Laura Boyce. I'm the Pennsylvania Executive Director of Teach Plus, a teacher leadership nonprofit. And one of the key issues that our organization advocates for is recruitment and retention of a diverse teacher workforce. And so I've had the privilege of leading the consortium's policy and advocacy committee and getting to work with Sharif and all of the other amazing leaders in this group. And we'd like to start off by acknowledging the many voices who contributed to the policy agenda we're going to be talking about today. On this screen are some of the organizations represented by members of the Policy and Advocacy Committee, and we're grateful to have also received input from members of the full consortium as well as many external stakeholders. So this is the product of many minds working together.
All right, so before we dive into specific recommendations in the agenda, we want to share the goals that led us to developing the agenda in the first place. First, we want to increase the diversity of Pennsylvania's teacher workforce to reflect the diversity of Pennsylvania's students. And secondly, we want to increase the cultural proficiency of all of the teachers across the Commonwealth in order to improve the experiences and outcomes of students and teachers of color in Pennsylvania. Now, obviously, these goals are similar to the goals of the consortium as a whole. However, while our individual institutions are already working to advance these goals through our programs and practices, we have come to appreciate even more over time that the pivotal role that policy in system-wide change has. There are certain actions at the institutional level that we cannot take without policy changes. And there are certain practices that we're already doing that can't scale up or be sustained across the entire state without policy incentives and ongoing funding. So this is the leadership that we believe is necessary to continue this work.
Thank you. So with that context, we're going to jump into the 5 recommendations. And while we're going to be talking about the full recommendations, we aren't going to display the full text of them on the slides. So please, we do encourage you to follow along in the policy agenda PDF that Sophie dropped into the chat. So the first recommendation will be no surprise to you based on Eric Duncan's presentation yesterday, as well as the presentation coming up from Research for Action and Sharif. It's to improve data collection and transparency around teacher diversity. Both Research for Action and Education Trust have called out Pennsylvania for not regularly publishing data about the diversity of the current and pre-service teacher workforce. We know this is a critical step for understanding the problem, for identifying bright spots we can learn from, and signaling that teacher diversity is a priority for the state. The data that we do have on Pennsylvania's teacher demographics comes from data obtained through public record requests by Research for Action. But PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, does not currently publish any teacher demographic data, even though it collects a lot of it already. And so we are calling on PDE to annually publish data on teacher and teacher candidate, racial demographics, teacher certification test pass rates and certificates granted by race, hiring by race, and retention by race. And this data should be disaggregated to the district and school levels. And again, much of this data already is collected by PDE, but it's not released to the public. And so this is low-hanging fruit to signal that Pennsylvania is serious about increasing teacher diversity.
Exactly. The second recommendation is to create an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion within the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Now, while PD has expressed a commitment to equity and specifically to diversifying the teacher workforce, there is not currently a clear owner of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across pre-K to 12th grade and higher education. An Office of DEI with a chief at the cabinet level will be able to ensure that DEI efforts are infused across all departments within PD and would own the teacher diversity work from pre-K to 16. We're calling for the office to articulate clear goals around teacher diversity for the state, conduct research on the teacher pipeline within Pennsylvania and best practices from other states to diversify the pipeline, develop a strategic plan for promoting teacher diversity, and ensure prioritization of DEI across all P through 16 PD initiatives and departments, including professional development for educators and leadership. We're talking about creating an office that has accountability and the positionality to affect change.
Yes. This third one is also not going to come as a surprise to any of you, as we've seen you asking questions in the chat, and particularly after all of the sessions yesterday around the competencies. So our third recommendation is to elevate and provide support around the culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies, which, as you know, were developed by this consortium with the encouragement of PDE. These competencies have been informed by the work of experts in the field, and now is the time to get them into the hands of practitioners from districts to educator preparation programs. And while the definition of culturally relevant and sustaining education is currently included in the proposed revised Chapter 49 requirements for educator prep programs, more should be done to ensure that educator prep programs are incorporating these competencies into their coursework within the next year. We can't wait 10 years for this to happen. Additionally, districts and educator prep programs will need resources to support training pre-service and in-service teachers in the competencies, and professors and trainers of teachers. PDE should leverage state and federal dollars to provide technical assistance grants to support incorporating the competencies into teacher development.
And now the fourth recommendation is a big and multifaceted one, and is basically the core of so much of our work at the Center for Black Educator Development and other members of this consortium. It is to invest in a diverse teacher pipeline. There are many different ways we can strategically invest to attract a more diverse workforce to the teaching profession in our state. Designating K-12 teachers as high priority occupations across Pennsylvania with a focus on teacher diversity can unlock so much potential workforce development resources and should be explored regionally. Additionally, we are calling on the state to provide funding for, 1, dual enrollment courses for students to start on their education degrees while they are still in high school. Secondly, a career and technical education pathway in teaching for high school students. Currently, there is none. 3, scholarships and loan forgiveness for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color teachers who are committing to teach in Pennsylvania. 4th, creating and supporting more teacher residencies and other innovative teacher preparation models. And finally, the state needs to provide clear guidance for districts on what policies and practices are needed to ensure that they are certifying, recruiting, hiring, and supporting teachers with the diversity and equity in mind.
And our final recommendation actually doesn't cost very much money, but would have a big impact. It is to remove barriers from Pennsylvania's teacher preparation and certification processes. There are a lot of barriers to becoming a teacher in Pennsylvania that disproportionately impact students of color, but that could be resolved with guidance or policy change from the state. So the first issue is many students start their education degrees at community college, but then have trouble getting all their credits to transfer to a 4-year university. Pennsylvania should work with in-state teacher prep programs to require them to develop articulation agreements with community colleges to accept credit for education coursework from transfer students. That will create a much more affordable pathway to getting certified for many students of color in Pennsylvania. Secondly, a lot of people don't know that Pennsylvania, unlike our neighbors in New Jersey, Ohio, and New York, we do not allow DACA recipients and green card holders to get certified to teach. This should be changed immediately, either through law. There's a current bill, SB 165, that would change this, or through administrative action by PDE. Thirdly, Pennsylvania has some of the strictest reciprocity rules for transferring certification from another state. We should develop reciprocity with other states to allow out-of-state educators to more easily become certified in Pennsylvania. Again, there's a current bill, SB 224, that proposes this. And finally, there are known racial disparities with some certification tests, including the Praxis. We recommend PDE study these disparities in certification test passing rates and recommend alternatives or next steps for achieving equity in certification approval. Many of our recommendations, particularly number 1 and number 5, do not require significant resources to implement. Recommendations 2 and 3 require modest investments. Recommendation 4, though, requires a significant investment to be done well. Luckily, there are many potential funding sources to draw upon. First and foremost, the state should be devoting their own resources to this because it is a priority. The Department of Education has a budget that they can choose to allocate funds from for this priority, and the General Assembly should also allocate funds to support. There are also some non-pandemic federal education dollars that can be drawn upon. So for example, the initial Aspiring to Educate pilot program was paid for using federal Title II funds. Thirdly, the ESSER funds from the first, second, and third stimulus packages can be used for programs to promote teacher diversity. Pennsylvania received over $7.5 billion in ESSER funds, and over $500 million of that went to PDE. We think that PDE should use a significant amount of that money, at least 10%, to invest in teacher diversity initiatives. They can make that money go further by setting up matching grants where districts or educator prep programs need to bring their own stimulus resources to the table as well to match what PDE is committing. And finally, many people don't know that the proposed American Families Plan includes $9 billion to train, equip, and diversify the teacher workforce, including provisions for grow your own programs, teacher residencies, and targeting funding to HBCUs and minority serving institutions. And so that's another thing to advocate for at the federal level, is the passage of the American Families Plan with that $9 billion for teacher diversity.
Well, hopefully, as you're hearing all of this, you're feeling as fired up as I am and ready to advocate for this agenda. Here are a few ways that you can help, and we hope that you'll stay in touch, that you'll visit our website that was recently launched, and continue to help us to ramp up our advocacy efforts this summer and fall. And you can help by contacting your elected officials, letting them know that teacher diversity and cultural proficiency are important to you and your communities. Join our policy and advocacy committee, and stay tuned for action alerts and policy pushes as we continue to push this agenda forward.
So I see some people asking in the chat, do we have champions of